on this episode of The Brothers Mysterium.
The first time when it happened, I remember kind of waking up and not being able to, snap out of it.
I was completely paralyzed and unknown to the world.
Voices. Can't say I've ever heard voices.
I think what bothered me much more than the fact that I couldn't move was the fact that I couldn't scream.
If it is always changing based on your cultural belief, then it's not necessarily supernatural.
Maybe maybe shadows, but it'd all be made up in my head.
It's on the fringe of our understanding and knowledge of reality and consciousness and all of that.
In today's episode, we're taking an in-depth look at sleep paralysis.
My brother and I have always been intrigued by the unexplainable. Like many, we're fascinated with stories of the supernatural, fringe science, and modern-day mysteries.
Though we've seen no first-hand proof of its existence, our minds remain open to the possibility.
Unsatisfied with the so-called evidence on television and the internet, we are choosing to take matters into our own hands and conduct our own interviews and research.
Now we're on a quest to speak with as many people as we can and hear the stories of these events from those who have lived them.
No Hollywood effects or exaggerations, and no hidden agenda. We invite you to listen and decide what and who you believe.
We are the Brothers Mysterium.
Welcome to the Brothers Mysterium. This is Tommy, along with Eric.
Heyo.
Thank you for listening, as always.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you.
And one cool thing I like about this show is as it progresses, we learn more, come across new phenomena, new experiences, new categories. And one that I was not familiar with was sleep paralysis. And a buddy of mine was actually saying, like, we should do that on the show. And he's like, I've had these experiences. And I was thinking it's like just like a sleeping issue, like
restless leg syndrome.
Exactly. Like I was like, it's got to be something kind of supernatural or have a paranormal twist or something out of the ordinary. And then, he explained what it was. I dug even deeper into it and realized that it's a fairly common occurrence with a supernatural twist that you yourself have actually had experiences with. So share that with us.
I am actually very familiar with it. And that's actually kind of funny because I never thought of it like restless leg syndrome.
Well,
which I also have experience with, but that's a whole other episode. So anyway,
too scary for this show.
Yeah. So sleep paralysis. Yeah, I'm familiar with it. For those of you that have never experienced it, sleep paralysis is classified as a parasomnia, which just means it's a weird behavior or an odd thing that happens to you while you're sleeping. And pretty much during sleep paralysis, a person sort of wakes up while still sleeping, if that makes any sense. You're kind of in this half dream state. So you're conscious, but you're paralyzed and you're unable to move your body and you can't speak. You're just kind of laying there. For me, this happens as I'm falling asleep, but I have heard other people that have experiences of it in the early morning.
And that's important because it's a transitional period of you're just waking up, which is what appears to be most common, or you're just falling asleep and you're unable to move. But the supernatural effect of this is there is a feeling of dread, of terror, of being watched. And people also report seeing some sort of a shadowy figure looming over them, standing at the foot of their bed. And a lot of times there's also a pressure on their chest.
Right.
And they say that you'll actually see either like a dark cloud or sometimes people say a demon, a devil, something on their chest, actually, sitting on them, pressing on them. So it kind of varies from account to account. But in general, it's the combination of an inability to move, you can't talk, you're kind of stuck in your own body, accompanied by this weird, threatening feeling in the room, and a lot of times this figure who's either watching you or sitting on you, stepping on you, and actually touching you.
No, I've never felt anyone touch me or anything like that. But for me, it started in college, which I found this is a commonality amongst people. One of the things that I found to be a trigger is sleeping in a new location consistently. So like when you go to college, it's new, but you stay there for a while. Same if you move into like a new place or, you come back to your house after being away on vacation. So you're in a new location for more than just a couple nights. But like I said, for me, it started in college. And I remember laying in my dorm room on my back, falling asleep, and then kind of waking up and feeling this vibrational sensation throughout my whole body, hearing this buzzing sound. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't really move my body. Eventually, I did move my body, but it wasn't my actual body. It was sort of like a ghost body.
Well, it sounds almost like phantom limbs.
Right.
Which is when people lose an arm and a leg, either, it gets amputated because of a disease, a sickness, or, war or an accident. And they'll have oh, my thumb itches or something, even though their thumb is gone, or, their foot feels weird. They're moving their foot, but their foot is gone. So it sounds just like that.
That's a good comparison for that element of it. I can say for sure, though, that my body in actual reality was not moving. And that's why I say it's hard to know whether you're awake or dreaming, because reality is pretty distorted when you're in that state of mind. But I will say that the terror aspect of it is real, and I've definitely experienced that. I don't want to say too much about it because we have a lot of good stories and a lot of good guests in today's episode, and I kind of want to let them speak their minds before I open my big mouth. So yeah, I've had it. Yes, it can be pretty terrifying. Do I think it's supernatural? You'll have to wait and find out. And that's really the question in today's episode.
Indeed.
Is this phenomenon of sleep paralysis physiology and biology mixed with psychology? Or does it have an actual supernatural cause?
Now, for the people that believe it is something paranormal or supernatural, they're then divided into even more subgroups with different beliefs. Some people think it could be a demon, some sort of negative energy or shadow figure. Other people say it's aliens. Then there are those that say it's an energy body. It's your own astral projection, maybe, that you're sensing in the room, that you're feeling, that's maybe even on top of you. And there's still other people that believe it's some sort of a dimensional overlap, and you're just kind of getting a sneak peek into a different dimension, a different time.
There's a lot of theories, and there's a lot of ideas and cultural references and documentation throughout all of human history on this subject, I guess for as long as we've been sleeping, pretty much. A great example of this and a great portrayal of this is actually the painting that you, Tom, posted to our Facebook page.
Right.
It's called The Nightmare by Henry Fuseli. If you haven't seen it and you want to see it, go check out our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/The Brothers Mysterium, and it's on there. There's a lot of other good examples. There's a medieval Persian text called the Hidayat al-Hawain, which is believed to have a chapter about sleep paralysis, but when you read it, it's not exactly clear if the author is referring to a different parasomnia or not, but it could be sleep paralysis. And then in 1664, you have a Dutch physician named Isbrand van Diemenbroek, who wrote a case study about someone who was having problems sleeping. It's called Of the Nightmare. And in it, he uses the phrase, "The devil lay upon her and held her down." It's a pretty wild phrase.
It is on the rise now. I guess more and more people are reporting it and sharing their stories, and it's quite common. And there's actually an independent film about it. It's called The Nightmare, and it's directed by Rodney Asher.
He's also the guy that directed Room 237.
And one of the women featured in the film, Corinne, was willing to share her story with us here on the show.
The Brothers Mysterium.
From infancy through my 19th year, I had a real boogeyman tormenting me in my bed. Sleep paralysis is often accompanied with hypnagogic hallucinations. The visions vary from haunting feelings to aliens to creepy, nondescript beings. For me, the experience included the same being each time, a three-dimensional shadow man. When I was young, until age 12 or so, sleep paralysis could happen nightly. As I grew older, the frequency slightly decreased. Because I dealt with sleep paralysis so often, by age 15, I kept notes on how the process worked. I would lie down. Soon, a wave of utter exhaustion came over me. My limbs grew too heavy to move. my eyes and mouth sealed shut. I was completely paralyzed and unknown to the world. I am awake, yet unable to control my body in the slightest way. Then a vibration passes through my body, following the path of an electric current. Sometimes the vibration was so intense, I felt like I was hooked up to live voltage. Then I could hear voices of pain, anguish, suffering, anger enter my mind. Arguments, crying, static, a feeling of vast emotional remoteness, a great lack of love. As the vibrations grew stronger, I began to feel his presence. I can actually feel him moving closer. The three-dimensional shadow of a man approaching my bed. I describe it as hyper evil, an intense high vibration of low, deep death. I would try anything to awaken from this state of terror. I prayed each night for God to take the nightmares away. I got very good at praying. I will always remember the years of endless nocturnal terror and the side effects such as walking around at school in a daze, haunted by dreams throughout the day, wondering why this was happening to me, but finding comfort when my mother told me she too experienced similar dreams.
The comment Corinne makes here about her mother experiencing similar events related to sleep paralysis is definitely more noteworthy than it may seem at first. It could be that their house is a hotspot for supernatural activity, or maybe there's a sensitivity for otherworldly beings passed down from mother to daughter. Although on the flip side of this idea, the Journal of Sleep Research published a study which looked at the genetic component of sleeping habits and parasomnias, in particular, sleep paralysis. The abstract from the final report of this study says that the sample population examined were monozygotic and dizygotic twins and siblings, which is just a fancy way of saying identical and fraternal twins. It goes on to say that in the sample of young adults, sleep paralysis was moderately heritable, or able to be passed from parents to kids. The study concludes that there is a 53% moderate genetic influence on sleep paralysis. Studies like this only prove so much, and as Corinne points out, we may never know the cause.
The subject of the shadow man and nightly terror is a ripe field for the Jungian psychologist to go poking around in. However, I believe the truth behind sleep paralysis is far beyond the grasp of modern science.
Yeah, some of that I can agree with. The vibrations definitely, and she's got it right where it is very intense, and it is often accompanied by a buzzing sound that I've definitely either feel, well, I don't think I'm hearing it with my actual ears, but you can hear it like the same way you hear sounds in your head.
Your mental ears.
Yeah. Voices, can't say I've ever heard voices, but that feeling of terror is definitely there. And that's definitely where it's always ended for me, is you get this fearful feeling where you can't move. Sometimes you get false awakenings in which I believe I've shaken myself awake. And then the feeling of terror suddenly returns and you're like, holy shit, I'm not awake. I'm still sleeping. So this can happen over and over again until
Inception.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much like Inception in that way. And eventually, like, you kind of force yourself awake and you kind of know you're awake. And once I'm awake, I look back and I'm like, what the hell was I so afraid of? It seems stupid at that point. Once you're really awake again.
Now, how long does it take, say that you awake, actually awake?
Right.
Eyes are open. You can't move your limbs. How long until you're finally able to like sit up?
I'd say instantly once I know that I'm fully awake again. And that's what I think it is. Okay, so yeah, I'll spill the beans here. I don't think it's a supernatural thing. I think it's pretty much your body falling asleep, but you're still mentally aware. It's never happened to me where I'm fully conscious and like my eyes are open and I'm like, oh, I can't move my body. Like, you know, I would say I'm like 75% asleep and mostly dreaming at that point, but it just happens to be a dream that is extremely topical to what I'm actually doing, which is lying in my bed.
That's a very boring dream.
Yeah, exactly.
I have great dreams about supermodels and I'm flying.
Yeah,
you dream about laying in bed.
I have those dreams too, but I would say it's not anything supernatural. I couldn't exactly explain where the fear element comes from, but I think it is a half awake, half asleep. Maybe possibly the balance is a little more off than that. Maybe you're more asleep than you are. I do have to say at the same time, I am a person who has been prone to sleepwalking in my life. I have had one witness to this.
I wake up to Eric standing up right next to my bed with a flashlight pointing in his eyes. I asked him what he was doing. He suddenly launched the flashlight across the room and then went back to bed.
The fact that I've been known to sleepwalk, I think plays into that. And that obviously speaks to the fact that sometimes the brain and the body, or the mind, if you will, and the body can be out of sync when it comes to sleeping. Because I've had experiences where physically I'm awake, but mentally I'm asleep and I'm doing things. And I've had the opposite where mentally I'm awake and physically I'm asleep. So
also, I know from firsthand experience, you used to talk in your sleep.
Aha.
And I will never forget when we were younger and shared a room, the time that you shot up in bed, looked at me and said, "The talking door." And then you dropped back down.
I do remember that story. Okay, so yeah, so this just shows you what kind of psycho has this experience. My mother claims that one night I was sleeping and she heard me talking to myself, and she clearly heard me use the phrase "Nintendo. How stupid."
Well, you're probably talking to the talking door.
Yeah, well.
At any rate, there's your take on it. Let's move on to somebody else's experiences with sleep paralysis. This is Guy.
The Brothers
Mysterium.
You know, the funny thing is, I didn't know what it was at first until I told a friend of mine about it. And he's the one that actually did the research. And he came to me and was like, you know, I think, you know, what you went through was sleep paralysis.
This is Guy. He's in his 30s, and he's experienced sleep paralysis a handful of times.
I'd probably say like 3 to 5 times, maybe.
And as you heard him say, he was pretty confused by the whole situation the first time it occurred, as are most people who experience it blindly without any prior knowledge of the condition. Even though he is more familiar with the phenomenon now, there are still a lot of strange, baffling factors, like what triggers it.
I would definitely say that there's no way to predict it. A lot of these times when it happens, you know, I can't think of a common habit or anything that kind of leads up to it. You know, it happened twice in college, once at my parents' house and, you know, once in my apartment with my wife. And, you know, maybe by coincidence there is, but, you know, I don't think there's anything common leading up to it. So the first time when it happened, I remember kind of waking up and not being able to, you know, snap out of it. You know, I was kind of just stationary and locked in my own body, and I just couldn't really wake up. I remember, you know, seeing in front of me this, you know, black shadowy figure. You know, it could have been the coat rack, you know, right in front of my bed. Who knows what it was, but I distinctly remember a black figure kind of, you know, looking right at me and just growling. And, you know, when that happened, I could kind of feel the aggressiveness building up inside of me to the point where I could feel my own teeth grinding and clenching. The first thing that comes to mind is, you know, how do I wake up? You know, I know I'm awake because I can recognize the surroundings and, you know, I can hear myself thinking. You know, I'm telling myself, you know, why can't I move? Why can't I snap out of it? You know, my vision is definitely somewhat limited because I can really only see what's in front of me. I can't really see what's on the side, but I can recognize that I'm in my room. So I know I'm awake to some degree. So, I mean, that's definitely the first thing that comes to mind. The second part is, you know, how do I snap out of it? You know, I can feel myself trying to, you know, gain some sort of, you know, force, if you will, just to try to, you know, to throw my arm over my body or to try and shake my leg or something. I can feel there, some sort of pressure on me that's preventing me from kind of, getting up and snapping out of it. But I mean, I'm in this trapped state, and I can feel the attempt to snap out of it, but it just doesn't really work. So that was a little bit more intense, if you will. And the following time, it happened, at a totally different place, but the common theme this time was, that black figure was still there. To be honest, I've always been creeped out by the whole paranormal thing, but I can honestly say that I've never been scared, if you will. But I do wonder why it's always there. Whenever these, instances happen, the black figure is the common theme. And I wonder, why is it always there? Definitely not afraid of it, but definitely intrigued by it.
So just like in Corinne's story, Guy not only feels an intruding presence in the room, but he actually sees a shadow person. And like we said earlier, this is a commonly reported circumstance related to episodes of sleep paralysis. Now, those who subscribe to the idea that shadow people are of a preternatural origin often explain them as beings from a different dimension who have somehow momentarily crossed into our dimension, or vice versa. For the empiricist or the scientifically minded, this may sound like an absolute load of garbage that can be easily written off as nothing more than a vivid nightmare or the overactive imagination of a crackpot at work. But when a respected theoretical physicist with a PhD in cosmology weighs in on the subject, it tends to cause the ears of even the most hardened naysayer to perk up. Here's Stephen Hawking in a clip from an interview with the BBC's Sarah Montague.
Characters in science fiction like Doctor Who are always traveling through other dimensions, but it now seems that other dimensions may be science fact rather than science fiction. We now have reason to believe that space-time may have more than the 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time that we experience. Why don't we see these extra dimensions? Why can't we move in more directions than forwards or backwards, sideways, and up or down? The answer may be that we live in a brain world. Here brain is spelled B-R-A-N-E. It means a membrane or surface in a larger space. Brains are the brainchild of my colleague, Paul Townsend, at Cambridge. The idea is that matter and light would be confined to the brain. Thus we could not travel through or even see the extra dimensions. However, we would feel them because gravity would spread through the extra dimensions from shadow brains that we cannot see. There could be shadow galaxies, shadow stars, and even shadow people who might wonder about the gravity they feel from matter on our brain. To us, such shadow objects would appear to be dark matter, matter that can't be seen, but whose gravity can be felt.
According to Dr. Hawking's theory, we wouldn't actually be able to see any elements from a shadow world in our own. So this theory doesn't fully support the suggested cross-dimensional explanation for the appearance of shadow people during sleep paralysis. It could be that he and his colleagues just haven't worked this idea all the way through yet, and maybe it is possible for visuals to cross over. Or could it be that there's really no connection between this theory and shadow people at all, and we're just kind of taking his use of the word shadow too literally? It is interesting to note, however, that Hawking did say that we would be able to feel and sense the gravity of objects from a shadow world in our own dimension. Could this possibly be the explanation for the heavy pressure on the chest that people also report as a symptom of sleep paralysis? Maybe. Anyway, our original question still remains for Guy. Can his experience be explained by science, or is it paranormal?
I'm not sure what triggers everything to kind of start. Why am I kind of waking up? Maybe it could be something that I heard, who knows what it could be. But there are definitely instances that kind of make me feel that, there very well could be a reason for all of this, the scientific backing, like you just said. But there's another part of me that, kind of reminds me of, I know how I felt when I first saw this and when I first felt it. So, who knows, I'm kind of partial to both of those, I guess.
So that was Guy's story, and we're kind of using you as our base for sleep paralysis comparison.
Yeah, because unlike ghosts, this is something I am very familiar with. So.
Indeed. So the first thing I'm just going to kind of acknowledge is he said that this has happened in a lot of different locations, different places when he had first moved in and stuff like that. So that does fit your theory that it's different places, not sleeping in the same place can kind of create an episode.
Right.
I don't think you mentioned, he said he definitely saw a shadow figure, just like Corinne had said and other people have reported. I mean, he said he felt like, intense aggression, heard growling. He was even kind of clenching his body and like his jaw. It was so intense. Have you ever seen a shadow figure, anything like that?
I've never seen a shadow figure. Like I said, I've felt the feeling of dread and terror. And I would say, like Guy was saying, like he's aware he's in his room. I'm definitely aware I'm in my room too. And I would say there's usually a point in the room where I could pinpoint as the source of the feeling, but never actually saw anything. Like I could be laying in my bed and say, diagonal to where I am by the closet, I feel like there's just a black cloud of dread coming from that area that's affecting me. But no, never seen anything humanoid, no shadow figures, no faces, no growling, never been grabbed, nothing.
So you don't see a black cloud, you can just sense.
I can just sense it.
Something negative is from that direction.
Yes.
And then the final thing Guy had mentioned was he said he's trying to build up his strength and force to get the pressure off him. He can kind of feel the pressure. Do you have the sensation of like a pressure on your chest or anything like that ever?
No pressure. No pressure. I've heard that before, but no, I've never experienced that. But I definitely know the feeling of, I wouldn't say grinding my teeth, which I probably do in my sleep anyway. But I definitely know what he's saying about kind of mustering your strength to wake up.
That answers that.
Yeah. The other thing now that I did a little research, because I was thinking back, another one of these bad sleeping things that I'm prone to experiencing, besides the sleep paralysis and talking in my sleep and sleepwalking, because like I said, I don't think any of this is supernatural. I think it's just certain people have these weird sleeping habits, and I think it's all mental. Something else I experienced is the hypnic jerk, which is...
What'd you call me?
It's an involuntary twitch that happens as a person is falling asleep, and sometimes it's accompanied by a dream. And I remember actually one time where it was you and Brian Slegman. We were all at a sleepover at our parents' house. We were in grade school. And I remember falling asleep and listening to you guys talking all the while. So your real conversation was in my dream.
Right.
But I was out on the driveway riding my bike and you guys were standing there. In reality, I was laying in my sleeping bag in the living room. And I remember falling off my bike and slamming into the ground. And as soon as I slammed into the ground, I jerked awake in real life. And that happens pretty often, even to this day, where as I'm in the stage of falling asleep, I'll experience the hypnic jerk, which is usually a brief dream that ends in some kind of forceful slam. I'm slammed in some way.
Yeah, I would say that that's definitely very common. I have dreams like that all the time. I've been known to have very, very violent dreams where I'm being shot, stabbed, I'm fighting people.
Oh, yeah.
So much so that I once punched our mom when she came to wake me up because she tapped me and said, "Stand up," and I hit her in the
face. I do remember that.
But I definitely experienced that. And I'd say I probably have that like once a week.
Yeah.
Like that's very, very common.
Yeah.
As is, I would say, incorporating sounds into your dreams, whether it's the TVs on, the radio, like you said, a conversation. I remember Father Mysterium telling me once he had it's almost like a nightmare where he's having a dream, he's doing something, and this old lady is just next to him and just keeps saying his name over and over and over. And he wakes up and it was just actually the cat just going meow, meow, meow. Yeah. So they definitely do work their way into your subconscious, into your dreams.
Right. Now, it may seem like we're getting away from the topic at hand here, but my point in saying this is that I think these things are all related. I think it's your subconscious and the conscious part of your brain kind of like mixing slowly as you drift away into sleep. I do not think that when you're starting to fall asleep, you somehow have this glimpse into this world of shadow people or demons or anything like that.
Okay, I am recording.
This is Ralph.
All right.
He's a West Coaster.
I'm currently living in the Los Angeles area.
And the reason we had this conversation? Yeah, you guessed it.
I've had sleep paralysis pretty frequently. I think for me, it's fairly common, you know. I started to become more aware of it with, you know, getting into the whole OBE, astral projection territory.
For those unfamiliar, OBE stands for out-of-body experience. Generally, it's a supposed phenomenon in which one either intentionally or accidentally experiences a temporary separation from their physical body. It's also called astral projection because one is projecting their, we'll say, soul outward from their body. Now, sleep paralysis is often considered an early precursor in the stages leading up to an OBE.
Yeah, for me, sleep paralysis, I usually wake up into it. So like after, you know, I guess I'll be asleep during the night and then I'll wake up into sleep paralysis. But I usually can't move anything, you know, they call it sleep paralysis for a reason. You're like paralyzed.
As expected, Ralph's experience includes all the classic components that are present in other stories. Feeling half awake, not being able to move, the unknown element of terror, an intrusive presence. But at this point, he is so familiar with the experience that none of these things really faze him anymore.
I usually just kind of lay there and then end up falling back asleep or something.
Naturally, Tom and I were very curious as to whether or not the shadow people were also showing up at Ralph's house. But much like my experience, he's never actually seen a figure.
More of a feeling, definitely. Like this like evil presence there, it seemed like. I remember reading about it, and some people seem to refer to it as like this like an old witch, like an old woman, like standing there. That seemed to be a common theme that people talk about. I don't know that I've ever experienced it being like an old witch, but I've definitely experienced some sort of presence being there.
To Ralph, the spookier concepts associated with sleep paralysis aren't all that interesting. Instead, he finds himself researching the possible connection between sleep paralysis and metaphysics and the unknowns of human consciousness and even human spirituality.
So Robert Bruce, you know, he's like one of the astral projection gurus. His experience of sleep paralysis and astral projection and dreaming and all of that, lucid dreaming, is that they're all connected and they're just like these sort of different states. And that when we go to sleep, we have these different layers of energy bodies. So yeah, so basically he says, I'm not saying that this is true, but his interpretation of it is that you go to sleep and then all these various layers of your energy body kind of split apart and go out and do all these different things. They go into like the dream world, they go into astral projection.
When you project out of your body, this is astral projection, your mind splits into two identical copies.
This is Robert Bruce. He's an Australian New Age mystic author, and he's considered to be one of the world's foremost experts on out-of-body experience. This is the guy whose theory Ralph is explaining.
An energy copy is generated and projected out of body, and the real you can stay in your body, still thinking and still be awake during the projection.
Oh my goodness.
And that normally causes paralysis. Your physical body mind will be paralyzed.
So when you have sleep paralysis, you're in your physical body, and then this other presence that you're experiencing might be another layer of your energy body that is leaving your body. It's not actually somebody else, it's actually just another like layer of your energy body. Because it's such a, you know, I guess an uncommon and probably maybe, I don't want to say unnatural, but definitely an odd experience, and you interpret that as, you know, terror. Once I read that, and again, I'm not sure if I necessarily believe that, but once I read that, the experience of terror doesn't happen to me anymore when I have the sleep paralysis. It's just like, oh, I'm stuck in my body.
If one believes along the lines of this theory, it then raises bigger questions about human consciousness and even the structure of reality.
My beliefs and understanding about reality is that we as humans don't know too much about reality. And even within the physical realm, there's so much about just this physical, tangible world that we don't know, you know, and probably never will know. And I think that there is more beyond the physical realm that we just don't understand, we don't know, we can barely perceive. I mean, like, dreams can be interpreted as, existing within the brain and within the mind, but you still experience this whole other reality in the dream world. It's not physical. So where do I think sleep paralysis falls into that? I think it falls into the edge of our understanding and perception of reality. Like, where I think it's along the lines of dreaming as well. Dreaming is in that, like, sort of fringe area of reality. It's on the fringe of our understanding and knowledge of reality and consciousness and all of that. That's how I understand it.
Cool. That's pretty good. Thanks for chatting with me.
Yeah, of course. I like talking about weird shit.
So, first interesting thing that jumps out at me from Ralph's story sort of fits into what Guy had said, which is the more you get used to it, the more the feeling of terror kind of goes away. And it's more just sort of like, all right, I'm back in this. I'll wait a little bit. I'll wake up. I'll regain movement. Or Ralph said he'll even fall back asleep.
Right. And that's something I also have personal experience with, where once I got used to it happening, I definitely tried to kind of stay in that state for longer periods of time to try and explore it. Like, a lot of people say, like, they fight it. I came to a point where I would get the vibrations and you'd feel the terror, and I'd try and tell myself, like, let's hang out here for as long as we can, which, I mean, never really yielded any results at this point, because sometimes that, like I said, that terror feeling, it becomes pretty intense, as do the vibrations. And then I said, once I wake up, I'm like, you dumbass, what were you so afraid of? There's nothing happening. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll try and do an in-depth exploration next time it happens.
Yeah, keep us posted.
The Brothers Mysterium.
So it sounds different than All right. So sleep paralysis first and foremost. You've had sleep paralysis, you said, right?
Correct.
Any specific instances that you remember?
I mean, they're all pretty much the same.
Okay. Would you like to explain how they go, or what they're like for you?
Yeah, I guess I wake up and I can't move any of my limbs. Yeah, I'm thinking about moving. I'm not actually moving, but there's a feeling of, like, if I try really hard, maybe I keep moving a little bit, but I'm actually not.
Right. Okay.
So I keep trying, and until I freak out.
Do you ever feel a presence in the room when it happens? Or
sometimes.
Or a sense of dread?
Sometimes. Yeah, I don't think I've seen anybody. Maybe shadows, but it'd all be made up in my head. Eventually, I've kind of figured it's happened often enough that I realize what's going on.
So you just kind of shake it off?
No, from what I've read online is that it's kind of a mind and body thing, and if you wait about 30 seconds, eventually you gain control again, which is usually the case.
So would you say it has a supernatural cause, or it's just like a psychological thing, like a somnambulant kind of thing?
I think that the mind is maybe running too long, or something's going on with the difference between the mind and the body, where the mind's awake and the body's still asleep.
Right.
And they're not in sync with each other. So it might be a sleep thing, might be an exercise thing. When I work out, I don't think I ever seem to have them.
In this example, Wedge, as he preferred to be called on the show, directly states that he believes the cause of sleep paralysis to be completely physical and biological. This caused Tommy and I to dig a little deeper into parasomnias and what happens to the body when it falls asleep. So, who better to ask than someone with a background in neurology and psychiatry?
All right, so I wrote this down beforehand. So if it sounds a little bit like I'm reading it off a piece of paper,
it's because you are.
It's because I am, yeah.
This is my fiance, Amy, who you probably remember from the last episode.
Here we go. Scientifically speaking, sleep paralysis, or SP, is a type of parasomnia. According to the DSM-5, a parasomnia is a sleep disorder that involves abnormal behaviors or abnormal physiological events that occur either during sleep or during sleep-wake transitions. SP involves an abnormal physiological event that occurs during sleep-wake transitions. The abnormal physiological event is the fact that the mind and body are out of sync. In a normal sleep cycle, your body is appropriately paralyzed at certain points to protect you from physically acting out or physically reacting to non-physical events.
Just like the example of Tom punching our mother in the face when she came to wake him up.
When someone experiences SP, it is because that person's body becomes paralyzed either inappropriately early or remains paralyzed inappropriately late, allowing for conscious awareness of the experience. With consciousness itself in transition, feelings of being trapped, immobilized, held down, or otherwise restrained can give rise to the frequent experiences of hallucinations involving figures in the room. The entities described often vary based upon culture, but may include demons, witches, vampires, aliens, ghosts, and leave it to my Hungarian ancestors to add chickens to the list of terrifying chest-pressing entities. The hallucinations are classified as hypnagogic if they occur before falling asleep, or hypnopompic if they occur after waking up.
I did some digging on my own, some medical research, and I was only able to find one thing. It's called locked-in syndrome. It is a real documented medical condition that exhibits the same symptoms. So I feel like that's important to mention just because there is sort of a link there. It's obviously a loose connection, but there is your body will go into this state of paralysis where you can still move your eyes, your mind is still fully functioning, but you can't speak, you can't sit up, you can't move your hands. So I just thought that was something that we should mention that we came across in our research. No real link to it with sleep paralysis besides the fact that sleep paralysis, I guess you could argue, is a very, 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 very mild form of locked-in syndrome.
Once again, to help us clarify this, we turn to Amy.
Locked-in syndrome and sleep paralysis do have some things in common, at least on paper. Like, you can't voluntarily move any part of your body, but you might be able to move your eyes, and your consciousness is intact. Locked-in syndrome is actually a lot different. It's caused by damage to part of the brainstem known as the pons, usually by a stroke, but it can really be caused by any type of brain damage. And in that condition, unlike sleep paralysis, it's not a transient state. You're like that. It's not associated with sleep. It's just associated with the inability to move any voluntary muscles except for sometimes your eyes. If you can't even move your eyes, then it's called total locked-in syndrome. You don't have the hallucinations the way you have hallucinations in sleep paralysis because it's not, you're fully conscious. You're not in between sleep and wake states. You don't have that sense of overwhelming terror and the feeling like you're being electrocuted, although it's very likely that you'd have a sense of very real terror if you found yourself to be in that kind of a situation. Locked-in syndrome, this can also be known as cerebromedulospinal disconnection.
And while we're on the subject of looking at it from a scientific standpoint, there's another great article called Sometimes I Wake Up in the Middle of the Night and Can't Move. Here's Why. It's from Business Insider. It was written by Christina Sturbins, January 30th, 2015. It's always nice to have some stats to back things up. So in the article, she says that a 2011 paper combined 35 studies with more than 36,000 participants total, and the authors of the study found that 7.6% of the general population experiences sleep paralysis, rising to 28.3% in high-risk groups like students who have disruptive sleep patterns, and in people with mental disorders like anxiety and depression, where it's 31.9%. So if you're anxious, if you're depressed, and students with weird sleep patterns, which kind of fits into, a lot of people said the first time they had it in college. Like you said, sleeping in new places, different places, I'm sure sleeping weird hours, going to sleep drunk and all that stuff.
Right. And
affects
that's
your brain.
Yeah. Amy and I were talking just a few minutes ago on the phone, and she was saying how it's similar to people who drink or they take benzos and things like that. They don't reach that final level of sleep, so they're not getting that restful sleep, which is why sometimes when you drink, you pretty much have like a restless night.
Yes.
I think that's kind of where your mind is when you experience the sleep paralysis.
And the article also mentions, which I just thought was interesting, how cultural beliefs influence the hallucination phase of sleep paralysis. So while, as we were talking about, a lot of people say it's demons, shadow people, other cultures, other places where different religions take over and stuff, it's not so much a demon or a devil, but they'll see intruders, burglars. They'll say, I thought it was a rapist or something coming at me. Other people will say, I thought I saw an alien. So it's interesting that it's not like a common, if it was supernatural, I feel like if it was like a demon, it would always be a demon.
Right.
As opposed to if it is always changing based on your cultural belief, then it's not necessarily supernatural.
I'm just wondering why all the people that we interviewed, they all said shadow person. You would think they'd be more inclined to say, like you just read, burglar or rapist or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's interesting.
As we were researching this episode, we began to notice that what you just heard Tom say about different cultures and sleep paralysis, it's actually a much larger topic than we initially thought. It turns out sleep paralysis is actually one of the most universally experienced phenomena, and all across the world, different cultures define the feelings, experiences, and even the ghastly entities associated with sleep paralysis in their own way.
In the Philippines, they call it bangungot, to rise and moan in sleep. After effects of a nightmare similar to sleep paralysis, also possibly related to sudden and unexplained death in sleep.
The Spanish word is pesanta, enormous dog or cat that goes into people's houses and sits on their chest.
In Russia, it's known as kikamora, which translates to legendary creature or female house spirit.
Kanashibari, it means sleep paralysis in Japanese.
In French, it's apasa. In English, it's to press down upon.
In Polish, there are a couple words. One of them is stryga, and the other being vampir. Those are the two words in Polish for vampire.
Is pesadilla, derived from the verb peser, meaning to press down upon.
Hexenderich in German, which translates literally.
In English, it's crisis of the waking state.
Cataplexy of awakening. Other term for sleep paralysis.
Before we wrap this episode up, we have one more story, and it's actually Amy's firsthand account of the first time she experienced sleep paralysis.
The Brothers Mysterium.
My first memory and my strongest memory of what would be called sleep paralysis occurred when I was in college. I remember this incredibly clearly. It was sophomore year. My roommate, Angie, got the bottom bunk because she got there, like 5 minutes before me. So,
as is normal for first-year college students, it takes some time to adjust to a new living situation. But eventually, Amy gets herself into a somewhat regular sleep routine.
I was lying on my back with my face being probably 3 feet from our dorm room ceiling.
Amy dozes off into her usual night's rest, but it doesn't last for too long. She suddenly finds herself awake, and things aren't right.
And I just felt like terrified, just out of nowhere, absolutely like I was having a panic attack, basically. And I opened my eyes, and sitting on my chest, sort of off to the bottom left side, maybe more my abdomen, was this thing. The best description I could give would be like a very, very malnourished person, sort of balled up, almost like a cat in attack position, with like discolored skin just clinging to this thing's bones. You could see all the sharp edges sticking out of its skin. It was bones with skin tented over it, yet somehow it wasn't weak. It didn't feel weak. It felt very, very intimidating. The second I opened my eyes to see this thing, I remember feeling like my eyes rolled back in my head, and I just remember feeling like I was going into a seizure, just convulsing. And after that, being out of breath. So I closed my eyes and I was just in complete terror. And after a few minutes, I got up the kind of enough curiosity to want to see, like, all right, is this gone? Is this thing gone? And I opened my eyes, and the fact that I was paralyzed, I mean, it was always a part of this, but somehow it was not the main factor for me at this time. It was more the fact that there was this thing sitting on me, and it was scarier than anything I'd seen in a movie. And the fact that I was going into these seizures, I mean, it was terrifying. I think what bothered me much more than the fact that I couldn't move was the fact that I couldn't scream, because my roommate was on the bottom bunk, and all I was trying to do was scream, Angie, Angie. I thought if I could wake her up, she could do something. Probably because if I could move, I'd be way too afraid to move anyway. I decided again, like, all right, I'm going to open my eyes. I'm going to do it again. And this just kept repeating itself over and over and over. I tried so hard to yell for my roommate. I could not yell for my roommate. I really doubt, I mean, it was draining. It was a very draining experience.
The next morning, Amy decides to tell her new roommate about what had happened to her during the night.
Her reply to me was that, you need to go to church. You need to go talk to a priest, like, now.
All right, so that was Amy's story. Very, very interesting. And the one thing that jumps out at me right off the bat is the fact that she actually very clearly saw the thing sitting on top of her. Very descriptive. It obviously stuck in her mind. She was seeing the being that was perched on her body.
I think the interesting thing about this particular encounter is that it wasn't just a shadow person. It wasn't something else in the room that could be easily mistaken for a shadow or a silhouette. Well, in this particular case, she saw features, skin, what looked like bones underneath it, eyes staring at her. It's interesting that it wasn't the shadow person. It was a much more vivid figure this time.
Yeah, much harder to debunk, as it were, as we've said before. Like, maybe it was just the coat rack. Maybe it was a shadow of a tree outside. Like, as you said, this was a very in-detailed, in-focus creature sitting on her.
Yeah.
Do you know how long it lasted? Because she said, the way she describes it, seems like she was kind of in this sleep paralysis state for a while, where she's closing her eyes, opening them, it's still there. She's trying to yell, she can't, and do you know if it just seemed to her that it was like 5 minutes long, or was it actually 5 minutes? Do you have any idea by chance?
She did say at some point when we were talking that she feels like it was going on for like an hour at least. But when she came to, she said it could have been a couple minutes. It's same as like I said, like when you're in the moment experiencing the terror, it's real and it's terrifying. But then when you wake up, you're like, what was I so scared of? That was kind of stupid. I guess it's the same way with time for some people.
Yeah.
When you're in it, the time feels stopped or longer than it really is. But once you come to later, you realize it may not have been as long as you perceived it to be.
Yeah, that seems to be a common trait. And it was cool just to get kind of a different perspective, a different version of sleep paralysis, as everybody has their own individual occurrences, experiences with it. I'm kind of glad we were able to find one with, a very clear being on top of her, not on her chest necessarily, a little more to the abdomen, to her side, but she felt it there, and you could hear it in her voice, like she saw that thing. So it's a cool experience.
The Brothers.
Mysterium.
So I guess it comes down to the question of, is sleep paralysis something psychological, biological, or supernatural?
Okay. Like I said, and I said it throughout the entire episode, so I'm sorry to repeat myself, but I would say it is biological mixed with psychological. It starts biologically and then it takes on a psychological element to it, because physically you're experiencing this paralysis, you're paralyzed, you can't move your body. What your brain then does with it from that point on is the psychological element. I wonder if there's something to be said about the psychological profile of someone who experiences the terror and then has this, afterthought later about like, what was this? That's kind of crazy. There may be people who experience this and don't experience the terror of it, and therefore they make nothing of it.
They just assume it was a weird wake up.
It's not even worth
sensation.
remembering, So I don't know. If there's anyone out there that has had sleep paralysis sans terror or anything similar, I'd like to know about it. So I've said over and over again what I think. What do you think? Do you think it's supernatural or not?
In my own opinion, having never experienced it myself, I think that it is a biological and psychological occurrence where it sounds to me, again, I've never experienced it myself, but it sounds like your mind wakes up before your body. And that's as simple as I can put it. You wake up, your eyes are open, your brain's coming out of, you're not fully awake, but you're coming out of it. And your body's just not there yet. And like the first article said, your body secretes hormones and things, maybe not hormones, but it secretes something so that to protect you, you should see a doctor if you're secreting something, but it takes care of itself and it, shuts down its system. That's why you're not supposed to sleepwalk, or you could walk out a window, or, your body's shut down, your movements are shut down. Your mind is always going, as we know from dreams and stuff. And I think it's just that you wake up before your body has kicked back on the power system. You're trapped there, and the hallucinations make sense to me where, as we said, like you feel pressure on your chest, so your brain makes something. You feel this feeling of terror, so your mind will sort of create something to be...
Fill in the blank, as
right,
you will.
Exactly. It's something to be terrified of, whether it be a shadow figure or just some presence in the room. So I feel like it sounds like it's scary, sounds like it's weird, it's very intriguing, but in this instance, I lean more towards science.
I feel kind of bad because you said you never experienced it. I'm trying to think if there's a way we could like trigger it.
No. Apparently not. Maybe if I sleep in a lot of different places.
Well, do you have weird sleeping habits?
I go to sleep very late and wake up very early.
Yeah, so do I. Some nights I don't sleep at all.
I've had that as well.
Yeah.
But, well, we'll see. I mean, maybe I can find some way to induce a sleep paralysis episode, and we'll see what happens.
Oh, all right. Something else I will say. This is unrelated, but for all of you listeners out there, you should try this, because this might get you on the right road here, or maybe you'll just have fun with it. So what I want everyone listening to do tonight is to lay in their bed, kind of like, like a straight line on your back, head resting back, straight line, arms at your sides. And what you should do is you should picture your arms raising up, like as if you were doing the wave kind of, but keeping them straight out in front of you. Don't actually move them, but just think about the movement and kind of simulate in your head the feeling you would have if that movement was happening. Now, sometimes I've done this and my muscles will actually start to lock up and move on their own.
Like once you've stopped doing it?
Well, no, while I'm thinking about it, and I'm not voluntarily doing it, but like I can literally feel like my muscles start to like tighten and like start to embrace that motion.
And do they actually move up?
Yeah, they do.
And can you stop it at that point?
Oh, yeah. At any moment you can take control and start moving them back, but you're not actually physically doing it.
Interesting.
That I feel like is a good precursor to putting yourself in the state of mind to have sleep paralysis. And it's another good example of how mind affects the body. It may work for you. It may not. If it does, let us know. If not, don't. No.
Well,
if it doesn't work, definitely tell us too. I've tried that before and it's cool. You should try it tonight.
Well, there it is. The Eric Sleep Paralysis Challenge. Raise your arms, raise your hands, and raise a glass to the Brothers Mysterium. Thanks for listening. Sleep paralysis. Verdict on this one. Not that we usually like to give a verdict, but we're both in agreement that it's more of a biological occurrence with the mind and the body than anything supernatural. I'm sure people out there will disagree, so let us know if you have a cool story, anything to add to the conversation. As always, shoot us a message.
I'm going to get attacked by a demon in my sleep tonight.
I hope so. We'll discuss it.
All right.
Next time on The Brothers Mysterium.
Do Grace and Virginia Kennedy really talk over life's complexities in a secret language of their own invention? Or is their mysterious speech an almost meaningless babble that only sounds sophisticated to others?
As soon as she's hit, I hear a shrieking sound. I turn and look to my right, and her twin sister is holding her hands over her nose, shrieking in pain.
As children, they may suddenly become withdrawn and feel a dark mood of despair, or fear of death coming upon them for no particular reason.
I don't think it's the devil taking control of your car and crashing it. I think it's just user error at that point.
Thank you for listening to The Brothers Mysterium. If you like what you heard, give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/The Brothers Mysterium. Follow us on Twitter @Mysterium Bros. And feel free to shoot us an email with comments, questions, concerns, or topics for shows at thebrothersmysterium@gmail.com. As always, our theme song is performed by The Never Grin. The Stephen Hawking clip comes from the BBC's Radio 4. We want to give a shout out to The Nightmare, 2015 documentary film by Rodney Asher. Check it out. We'd like to thank Corinne for sharing her story. You can check her out at occultpriestess.com. Definitions provided by Tomo, Tristan Sear, Alexandra Lazio, Olga Tiganoff, Joella Palatulan, Andy Williams, Jessica Fox, and James Crazy Legs Bouchard. And thanks to Matt J. for telling Eric's sleepwalking story. And finally, additional voices for this episode provided by Dan and Gwed Hudson. Until next time, we are the Brothers Mysterium.